So welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and I'm joined as always by our resident expert. And today we are talking about the most famous man on Earth.
Yeah, a literal global icon.
Right. Someone whose face was instantly recognized in, virtually every country on the planet. Yeah. But here's the crazy part. He was legally trapped in the United States.
Which is just a wild paradox to start with.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, he never did a world tour. And it wasn't because he didn't want to or because the fans weren't there waiting for him.
No, not at all.
It was because the man who controlled his entire life, his manager, was actually a fugitive hiding from the law.
Yeah. And that dynamic right there perfectly frames what we are unpacking today.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to look at the absolute machinery of fame. We want to strip away the rhinestones and all that, cultural myth-making.
Because when you strip all of that away, you are left with a profoundly tragic reality.
Yeah, a really dark reality.
It's a story of isolation, systemic exploitation, and really the terrifying consequences of becoming a corporate asset rather than a human being.
Right. We're looking at the unvarnished truth of the king of rock and roll, a man who single-handedly changed global culture, yet died broke, hopelessly addicted, and surrounded by this echo chamber of people he paid to protect him.
And, to understand how a boy from one of the poorest towns in America ends up in this gilded cage, we have to look at the incredibly unique cultural collision that forged his sound.
For sure. So let's start at the beginning.
Right. You really have to look at the geography and the profound poverty of his origins to understand the mechanisms of his success. Yeah. We are talking about Tupelo, Mississippi in 1935.
Okay, so height of segregation.
Exactly. The height of segregation.
Right.
His family is living in a state of absolute destitution, and his life begins with this foundational trauma.
Twin brother, right?
Yeah, his twin brother is stillborn.
I was actually looking at that specific detail in our notes, and it seems to have created this incredibly intense, almost suffocating attachment to his mother, Gladys.
It did. I mean, when a mother loses one twin, the psychological weight placed on the surviving child is immense.
Oh, absolutely.
That bond became the emotional anchor of his entire life. He developed a deep-seated dependency on her, mainly because she was his only source of safety in a world that was incredibly unstable.
And that instability really peaks when he's just 3 years old. Because his father, Vernon, gets sent to prison.
Right, for check forgery.
Which triggers this devastating domino effect for the family. They lose their home. But, and this is fascinating, this is one of those sliding door moments in history, isn't it?
It really is.
Because they lose everything, they're forced into the absolute cheapest housing available. And that happens to be bordering a predominantly black neighborhood known as Shake Rag.
And this is where the cultural synthesis begins. That geographical shift changes his entire trajectory because Shake Rag was a vibrant hub of blues music.
Right. Music born directly from the trauma, the struggles, and, the emotional resilience of black Americans.
Exactly.
And here's this young white kid just sitting outside these clubs for hours, absorbing the structure and the raw emotion of the blues.
Soaking it all in.
But that's only half of the equation, right? Because simultaneously on Sundays, he is attending a Pentecostal church.
Yeah. And the Pentecostal influence is really the mechanical engine behind what made his eventual performances so revolutionary.
How so?
Well, you have to contextualize this. For 1930s segregated America, white church services of that era were generally very stoic, very reserved.
Right. You sit quietly in the pews.
Exactly. But in this specific Pentecostal church, the congregation was stomping, shouting, speaking in tongues, and dancing wildly in the aisles.
Wow.
It was a physical, totally uninhibited release of spiritual energy.
So he is internalizing the deep, melancholic storytelling of the blues and merging it with the physical, explosive energy of Pentecostal worship. It's almost like an open source musical education that literally nobody else in his demographic had access to.
Yeah, it was incredibly unique.
And it all funnels into one pivotal object. For his 11th birthday, he asks for a bicycle or a rifle. But his mother can't afford either.
Right.
So she goes to a hardware store and buys him a guitar for $12.
Which is arguably the most consequential $12 purchase in modern cultural history.
No kidding.
Because that instrument became the vehicle for the synthesis. So fast forward a few years, the family has moved to Memphis, and he's an 18-year-old kid just trying to get noticed at Sun's studio.
And it doesn't happen overnight, does it?
No, not at all. It takes a year of hanging around, trying different things, striking out.
But finally, during this frustrating, really unproductive recording session, He just starts spontaneously messing around with his guitar.
Right.
I start singing an old Arthur Crudup blues song called That's All Right, but he infuses it with that fast, physical, Pentecostal energy.
And the room just stops.
They record it on the spot. But there is a very specific moment that happens next that we need to dissect.
Oh, the radio interview.
Yes. When a local radio DJ decides to play the track, the switchboard completely lights up with callers wanting to know who is singing.
Because it sounded so different.
Exactly. So the DJ brings him in for an interview. But the very first question the DJ asks him isn't about his musical influences or his vocal style. He asks him, "What high school did you go to?"
To which he replies, Hume's High.
Right. And I was really struck by the mechanics of that exchange. Hume's High was an all-white school.
Yep.
The DJ was using this subtle societal code to tell his listening audience, hey, it is safe to like this artist. He is white.
It was a very deliberate signal.
So looking at this objectively, we have to ask you, the listener, an uncomfortable question. Was his massive, unprecedented breakout truly about his raw talent? Or was it primarily because he was a white performer who could safely package black music for a deeply segregated 1950s America?
Well, if we look at the historical realities of the era, the racial component was the undeniable catalyst.
Right.
Segregation was an iron wall. There were immensely talented black artists who originated this exact sound, but the systemic racism of the era literally locked them out of mainstream commercial radio and television networks.
Wow.
His racial identity was the key that bypassed those barriers. I mean, he possessed genuine, undeniable talent and magnetism, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
But he was also the culturally acceptable vessel for a sound the white mainstream was desperately craving, but structurally refused to accept from a black artist.
Right. It is the ultimate alignment of right place, right time, and right demographic.
Exactly.
But hitting that level of unprecedented commercial success created an immediate vulnerability for him.
Huge vulnerability.
He was a naive kid generating millions of dollars seemingly overnight, which made him the perfect prey for an industry fundamentally built on extraction.
And the machinery of extraction in early entertainment was brutal. This is where we see the blueprint for how he would be treated for the rest of his life.
Right. So in late 1955, his contract is bought by RCA for $35,000. And we get introduced to the head of RCA, David Sarnoff.
Oh, Sarnoff.
Yeah. I was reading through the background on this executive, and his ruthlessness is staggering. This is a man who built his early myth by falsely claiming he personally received the Titanic's distress signals.
The Sarnoff context is crucial because it establishes the environment this young artist was walking into.
Tell me about it.
Well, Sarnoff was fiercely protective of his AM radio empire. When a brilliant inventor created FM radio, which offered vastly superior sound quality, Sarnoff didn't embrace the innovation.
No, of course not.
He actively dragged the inventor through endless litigation until the man was financially ruined and tragically took his own life.
That is incredibly dark.
It is. Sarnoff didn't view people as humans. He viewed them as assets or threats to his investments.
So that is the corporate architecture at the very top. But Sarnoff is operating at a high level. The man who takes over the daily granular control of this artist's life is someone who makes Sarnoff look tame.
Colonel Tom Parker.
Yes. And I have to admit, when I first saw the name Colonel Tom Parker, I naturally assumed he was some strict military disciplinarian from the South.
Which is exactly the illusion he wanted to project.
Right. But the reality is that Colonel Tom Parker is a completely fabricated identity.
Totally fake.
His real name was Andreas Cornelis van Kuyk. He was an illegal Dutch immigrant who deserted the United States Army, spent time in a solitary confinement ward, which reportedly drove him to the brink of madness, and eventually reinvented himself as a carnival barker and talent manager.
It's unbelievable.
So how does an illegal immigrant with a fabricated identity manage to take absolute total control of the most lucrative artist in the world?
By utilizing what we often call the handler model of early Hollywood.
Okay, break that down for us.
The system intentionally surrounded young, highly profitable talents with shadowy figures, sometimes with mafia ties or just really shady pasts. Their primary function was isolation.
Isolation?
Yes. If the star has no outside friends, no independent legal counsel, and no connection to the real world, they become entirely dependent.
Wow.
And then the money flows in exactly one direction, straight through the handler.
It's like a parasite that latches onto a host.
That's a perfect analogy.
The parasite's only goal is to drain resources, but in doing so, it slowly kills the organism keeping it alive. And the isolation Parker orchestrated was literal.
Very literal.
Like we mentioned at the start, the king of rock and roll never toured outside of the US and Canada. Parker convinced him it was about security or logistics. But the real mechanism at play was that Parker didn't have a passport.
Exactly. Parker was terrified that if he left the country, the U.S. government would discover his illegal status and he wouldn't be allowed back in.
So the star's entire global potential, his ability to just experience the world and gain some perspective, was completely stunted, simply to protect his manager's secret.
It is the purest definition of a golden cage.
But keeping him in that cage required constant narrative control. Because early on, this artist was a massive threat to the establishment.
Oh, he was public enemy number one for a lot of people.
Right, clergymen called him a menace to society. They nicknamed him the Pelvis because his dancing was viewed as dangerously provocative.
It was scandalous at the time.
When he performed on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, the network executives literally forced the cameramen to film him from the waist up just to censor his hips.
Yeah, they were terrified of the backlash.
So Parker needs a way to sanitize this dangerous image, and he finds the ultimate PR machine, the United States military.
Right. In 1958, the artist is drafted into the Army. Now, with a star of this magnitude and wealth, Parker easily could have pulled strings to secure a deferment.
Without a doubt.
But he didn't try to stop it.
Because it is brilliant, albeit cynical, public relations.
Exactly.
Suddenly, the dangerous, hip-thrusting rebel has his hair buzzed off. He is in a crisp uniform. He is a respectable, dutiful soldier serving his country.
It instantly neutralizes the outrage from parents.
And it simultaneously builds this insane level of anticipation among the fans who are waiting for him to come back.
But the Army deployment is really where the psychological foundation completely fractures.
Yeah.
Just 5 months into his service, the absolute worst thing imaginable happens to him. His mother, Gladys, dies suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 46.
Wow. At 46.
Yes. And we have to pause on the psychological magnitude of this loss.
Right, because of that trauma bond we talked about.
Exactly. Remember, that intense attachment formed in his early childhood. Her death completely broke him. You have this young man dealing with unimaginable, unprecedented global fame, completely isolated by his manager, and the single grounding force in his entire life, the only person who loved him before the money, is suddenly gone forever.
He loses his anchor.
He does.
And shortly after, he is stationed in West Germany. He is grieving, he is exhausted from military drills, and that is where the coping mechanisms begin.
Yeah, that's the turning point.
A fellow soldier introduces him to amphetamines. They called them keep-awake pills back then.
Right.
And it's also in Germany where he meets Priscilla. He is 24 years old, and she is the 14-year-old daughter of a military officer.
The power dynamics at play in this relationship are deeply troubling.
To say the least.
But they reveal a lot about how extreme fame distorts reality. He is transitioning from a human being into a fully controlled corporate asset under Parker, right?
Yeah.
So in response to that complete loss of autonomy, he projects a desperate need for control onto Priscilla.
I was reading about how that dynamic evolved, and it's staggering.
Sure.
Later on, when she moves into Graceland, he exerts total dominance over her physical appearance.
Dictating everything.
Yeah, he dictates what clothes she's allowed to wear. He even forces her to dye her hair black to match his own hair color.
It's like a nesting doll of manipulation.
That's a great way to put it. Parker exerts absolute control over him, stripping him of his agency, so he turns around and manufactures a relationship where he holds all the power.
It is a tragic cycle of behavioral conditioning. But even constructing his own controlled environment at Graceland couldn't stop the downward spiral waiting for him professionally.
No, because when he returns to the States from the Army, whatever artistic control he had left is stripped away.
Parker decides that live touring is too unpredictable and too difficult to manage.
So he locks the artist into a Hollywood contract. And this is wild to me. He forces him to churn out 31 notoriously low-quality movies over the course of 13 years.
That is nearly 3 movies a year.
Which completely drains him of his artistic credibility.
Completely.
And then when the movie formula finally stops making money, the Vegas years begin.
And the Vegas era is where the exploitation transitions from psychological control to pure physical, mechanical destruction.
Let's look at the mechanics of that Vegas schedule, because it is inhumane. We are talking about up to 600 shows.
It's punishing.
There were periods where he was forced to perform 2 massive high-energy shows in a single night.
Yeah.
And you look at this and wonder, why? He is the most successful artist in the world. He should have generational wealth. Why is he working like an indentured servant?
And that brings us to the most disastrous contract in music history.
Oh, boy.
In 1973, he sells the rights to all his previous songs, his entire legendary catalog, to RCA for $5.4 million.
And out of that sum, Colonel Tom Parker takes over $2 million for himself.
Right. And the immediate question is why Parker structured a deal that required a massive instant cash payout.
Why did he?
The answer is that Parker had developed a crippling gambling addiction. He was losing upward of $1 million a year at the roulette tables in Vegas.
I am looking at these records and trying to reconcile the reality of this. The king of rock and roll is literally working his body to the point of failure, taking amphetamines to wake up for rehearsals, and heavy sedatives to come down after the second show, all to pay off his manager's casino debts.
It's horrific.
It makes you want to scream.
Yeah.
Like, he was the king. He had all the talent. Why couldn't he just fire Parker?
Because they were locked in a symbiosis of mutually assured destruction.
Mutually assured destruction. Wow.
Yes. The star knew about Parker's massive gambling debts and illegal status. But Parker knew the full extent of the star's severe and escalating pill addiction. If one went down, they both went down. Furthermore, the star's father, Vernon, relied entirely on Parker for financial management and stability.
So it was an impenetrable echo chamber.
Exactly. There was literally no one in his orbit who could afford to say no.
That is where the parasite metaphor really expands. It's like the initial parasite opened the door for an entire ecosystem of them.
Absolutely.
You have the Memphis Mafia, his childhood friends and bodyguards who lived on his payroll.
Right.
He was famously generous, giving away over 100 Cadillacs to friends and complete strangers. But because their livelihoods depended on his generosity, none of them intervened to stop the train.
They couldn't.
And then you have the catastrophic failure of the medical establishment. Specifically, Dr. George Nichopoulos, known as Dr. Nick.
Dr. Nick represents the ultimate enabler in this ecosystem. When you look at the prescription logs, the volume is difficult to comprehend.
It really is.
In just the final 8 months of his life, Dr. Nick prescribed him over 5,000 pills.
5,000?
Yes. This included a heavy cocktail of narcotics, amphetamines, and powerful sedatives.
5,000 pills in 8 months. It is systemic medical abuse.
It is.
And it all leads to the tragic inevitability of August 16th, 1977. He is scheduled to fly out for yet another tour. In the afternoon, his girlfriend at the time, Ginger Alden, wakes up, realizes he isn't in bed, and finds him face down on the bathroom floor at Graceland.
It's so sad.
The official public cause of death often cites cardiac arrhythmia, but the physiological reality is that years of severe compounding pill abuse had resulted in a massively enlarged colon and chronic, agonizing constipation.
Right.
The intense physical strain of simply trying to use the bathroom caused his heart to stop.
It is a profoundly pathetic, lonely, and deeply human way to die. And it stood in such stark, irreconcilable contrast to the myth of this golden god of rock and roll.
And that contrast is exactly why the world seemingly refused to accept it. The aftermath of his death triggers some of the most elaborate myth-making and conspiracy theories in modern history.
Oh, absolutely.
The reality of a lonely man dying on a bathroom floor was just too bleak for the culture to process.
The psychology of conspiracies is fascinating here. When a cultural deity dies in an undignified, sudden manner, the collective public psyche often recoils.
It projects it.
Yeah. It is psychologically much easier for fans to construct and believe an elaborate, thrilling fiction than it is to accept the grim, systemic reality of addiction and financial exploitation.
And the fictions they grabbed onto were incredibly elaborate. But interestingly, they were actually seeded by a very real, bizarre event in 1970.
The Nixon letter.
Yes. 7 years before his death, he randomly writes a rambling 6-page handwritten letter to President Richard Nixon. He gets on a commercial flight, shows up unannounced at the gates of the White House, and somehow actually secures a meeting in the Oval Office.
Which is just wild to think about.
He asked the President of the United States to make him a federal agent at large so he can help the government fight the war on drugs.
Which is a level of cognitive dissonance that is hard to overstate, considering he was, at that exact moment, heavily dependent on prescription narcotics.
He genuinely received an honorary DEA badge from the president, firmly believing he was fighting drug abuse while actively consuming thousands of pills.
The denial is staggering.
But years later, fans used the photographic evidence of that meeting to fuel a massive conspiracy. They tied it to a real ongoing FBI investigation called Operation Fountain Pen.
Right, and Operation Fountain Pen involved his father, Vernon, being scammed over the sale of one of the star's private airplanes by individuals connected to organized crime.
So the theorists connected those dots. The theory goes, he didn't die from a heart attack in the bathroom. He faked his own death to finally escape Colonel Parker's control and went into the witness protection program as an undercover FBI agent to take down the mafia.
It's like a movie plot.
And that desperate narrative led to decades of alleged sightings. The very day after he died, a man allegedly bought a plane ticket at the Memphis airport using the name John Burroughs, which was a known alias the star used when checking into hotels.
Right, fueling the fire.
10 years later, in 1987, a woman swore she saw him working the cash register at a Burger King in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Yeah.
In 1999, people seriously claimed they spotted him walking around Legoland.
It is the ultimate manifestation of a culture refusing to let go.
Yeah.
But while the public was busy hunting for ghosts in fast food restaurants, the real-world ripple effects of that machinery of exploitation continued to devastate his actual family.
The collateral damage is heartbreaking. His father, Vernon, who had enabled so much of it, died just 2 years later in 1979, effectively of a broken heart.
And Parker.
Colonel Tom Parker lived all the way until 1997. But despite extracting millions upon millions of dollars from his client, he died completely broke, having gambled every last cent away.
Wow.
And his only daughter, Lisa Marie, inherited this incredibly heavy, complicated legacy. She lived a very turbulent life in the spotlight, struggled with her own demons, and tragically passed away in 2023 at the age of 54.
It really proves that the machine that consumed him didn't just shut down when he died. It really moved on to consume the next generation.
So for you listening, as we pull all of these threads together, what are the distilled takeaways from this deep dive? We started with a fiercely talented boy living in crushing poverty, deeply attached to his mother, who became the vessel for a world-changing musical synthesis.
Right.
And we watched him get systematically eaten alive by the fame machine, by predatory handlers, and by a medical establishment that treated him like an ATM rather than a patient.
For you listening to this, there is a profoundly practical application to take away from this tragedy.
What's the core lesson?
This story is the ultimate historical warning about the dangers of living in an echo chamber. It does not matter if you are a global icon, a corporate executive, or just leading a small team in your community.
Yeah.
If you isolate yourself and you intentionally surround yourself with yes men, people whose financial livelihoods or social standing depend entirely on keeping you happy and never challenging you, you are mathematically guaranteeing your own downfall.
That is powerful.
Accountability is the friction that keeps us grounded in reality. When you insulate yourself from that friction, you lose your humanity.
That is such a crucial point. It really forces you to look at the glamour and the rhinestones through a completely different lens.
Absolutely.
I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder as we wrap up today. We discussed the specific mechanism of how he was physically trapped in America because his manager was an illegal immigrant terrified of border control.
Right, the lack of a passport.
Exactly. If Colonel Tom Parker had actually possessed a valid passport and the king had been allowed to mount a massive world tour, if you could have physically broken out of that suffocating insulated bubble of Graceland and those endless windowless Vegas hotel rooms, would seeing the globe and experiencing different cultures have saved his life by giving him a broader perspective on his own existence? Or, given the machinery already in place, would it have just exported his tragedy to a larger global stage? Think about that the next time you hear one of his records playing.